The old man's weathered hands trembled as he held the evidence that would expose one of Russia's most dangerous smuggling operations. Blood stained the snow around him, and in the distance, the howl of his unlikely ally pierced the frozen silence. Of the Siberian night, the criminal syndicate had underestimated two things: the bond between a broken old man and a wounded wolf, and the lengths they would go to protect an orphaned boy who had nowhere else to turn. Police sirens wailed through the forest as armed men surrounded the small wooden house. Inside, Matvey Antonovich clutched a rifle with shaking hands, while a massive grey wolf stood guard beside him, both ready to make their final stand against the Russian Mafia that had terrorized their village for too long. But to understand how a lonely widower and a surgically modified wolf became unlikely heroes in one of Russia's most shocking criminal cases, we need to go back to where it all began, to a snowy morning when death hung from a tree and mercy changed everything. Before we dive into this incredible true story that shook Russia to its core, I need you to do something for me. In the comments below, tell me which country you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. And if stories of courage, loyalty, and justice against impossible odds inspire you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, after you hear what Matvey and his wolf companion discovered about the Russian Mafia, you'll understand why this channel exists, to bring you the untold stories that matter. Now let's begin. In the remote wilderness near Kirov, Russia, where the winter wind cuts through your soul and the nearest neighbor might be miles away, lived a man who had given up on life long before life had given up on him. Matvey Antonovich was 73 years old, and for the past 5 years he had spoken more words to his deceased wife's photograph than to any living person. The small wooden house that had once echoed with laughter and the patter of small feet now stood as silent as a tomb. Every morning, Matvey would wake up and stare at the empty chair across from his kitchen table. The chair where his beloved Katya used to sit, drinking her tea and reading him passages from her favorite books. Next to it, smaller and painted, bright blue, sat the chair that had belonged to his son Dmitri, taken from them in a car accident on the same black day that claimed his wife. Matvey had been a teacher once, beloved by 3 generations of children in their small village. His classroom had been filled with warmth and knowledge, and his home had been the heart of their community. But grief has a way of hollowing out a man from the inside, leaving only the shell of who he used to be. Now he lived like a ghost, haunting his own life, going through the motions of survival without truly living. His daily routine was as predictable as the sunrise. Wake at dawn, make coffee for one, check the traps he set for small game, tend to his small garden in the warmer months, and spend the long evening hours staring into the fireplace, remembering better days. The villagers had tried to reach out to him in the beginning, but Matvey's grief was like a wall of ice that couldn't be melted by kind words or warm soup. Yet beneath the layers of sorrow and solitude, the heart of the teacher still beat. Matvey had always possessed an unusual sensitivity to the suffering of others, a quality that had made him exceptional with children and animals alike. Even in his darkest days, he couldn't walk past a wounded bird without stopping to help, couldn't ignore the cry of an animal in distress. It was this compassion, buried but not dead, that would soon change the course of his life forever. The old man had no way of knowing that his quiet existence was about to collide with forces far more dangerous and complex than anything he had ever imagined. He couldn't foresee that his simple act of mercy would expose a criminal network that reached into the highest levels of Russian society, or that his greatest ally in the battle ahead would be a creature that most people would fear to encounter alone in the wilderness. February 14th, 2023. A date that would be seared into Matvey's memory forever. The morning had started like any other, with the old man trudging through knee-deep snow to check his rabbit traps. The forest was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're the last person on Earth. His breath formed clouds in the bitter air as he moved from trap to trap, finding them empty as usual. It was then that he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the peaceful wilderness. Not quite a whimper, not quite a growl, but something in between that spoke of profound agony. Matvey stopped, his heart suddenly racing. The sound came again, weaker this time, from somewhere above. He looked up and felt his blood freeze in his veins. Suspended 15 feet above the ground, hanging from a thick rope around its neck, was the largest wolf he had ever seen. The magnificent creature was still alive, but barely. Its grey fur was matted with blood and ice, and its yellow eyes, filled with pain and exhaustion, locked onto Matvey's with an intensity that seemed almost human. But it wasn't just the sight of the suffering animal that made Matvey's hands shake. It was what he could see even from the ground. Strange scars crisscrossed the wolf's body, surgical precision marks that could only have been made by human hands. Someone had operated on this creature, and recently, the wolf's labored breathing created small puffs of vapor in the frigid air. Each breath could be its last. Matvey realized that whoever had done this had intended for the animal to die slowly, hanging there as a message or a warning. The cruelty of it ignited something inside the old man that he thought had died with his family. Righteous anger. Without hesitation, Matvey began to climb. At 73, his joints protested every movement, but determination drove him upward. The tree bark was slick with ice, and more than once he nearly lost his grip. Below him, if he fell, the frozen ground would likely kill him. Above him, a wild predator hung in agony, and for all he knew, it might attack him the moment he freed it. But Matvey climbed anyway, because in that moment, looking into those intelligent, pain-filled eyes, he saw something he recognized, the look of a creature that had lost everything and was ready to give up. He had seen that same look in his own mirror every day for 5 years. As he reached for his pocket knife, the wolf's eyes never left his face. There was no growling, no attempt to snap or threaten. Instead, there was something that looked almost like hope. The rope was thick and partially frozen, making it difficult to cut. With each sawing motion of his knife, Matvey whispered words of comfort to the wolf. The same gentle phrases he used to say to his students when they were frightened. "Easy now, big fellow. We'll have you down soon. Just hold on a little longer." When the rope finally snapped, both man and wolf tumbled to the ground in a heap of snow and fur. Matvey's shoulder screamed in pain, but he ignored it. The wolf lay motionless beside him, its massive chest rising and falling rapidly. Up close, the surgical scars were even more disturbing. Precise incisions that spoke of professional medical knowledge and equipment. Who would do such a thing to a wild animal, and why? As Matvey struggled to his feet, the wolf's golden eyes opened and fixed on him once again. There was no aggression there, only a profound exhaustion and something else, gratitude. The old man made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Come on then," he said softly, extending his hand toward the injured creature. "Let's get you home." Getting a 150-pound injured wolf back to his house proved to be one of the most challenging tasks of Matvey's life. The creature was conscious but weak, able to walk only with support. Every few hundred yards they had to stop while the wolf gathered strength, its breath coming in labored pants that created clouds of steam in the frozen air. Matvey fashioned a makeshift sling from his coat, supporting the wolf's weight as they made their way through the forest. The animal's trust was both touching and puzzling. Wild wolves simply didn't behave this way with humans. There was an intelligence in this creature's eyes that went beyond normal animal instinct, as if it understood not just that Matvey was helping, but why. "What did they do to you, my friend?" Matvey whispered as they paused again. The wolf looked up at him with those remarkable golden eyes, and for a moment the old man could swear he saw understanding there. The journey that normally took 20 minutes stretched into over an hour. By the time they reached Matvey's small wooden house, both man and wolf were exhausted, The old man had to practically carry the wounded animal up the front steps and through the door. Inside, the warmth of the house seemed to revive the wolf somewhat. Matvey laid out his thickest blankets near the fireplace and helped the creature settle onto them. For the first time in 5 years, his house didn't feel empty. The presence of another living being, even one so unusual, brought a spark of life back into the cold rooms. As the wolf rested, Matvey examined its injuries more closely. The surgical scars were even more disturbing up close. Clean, professional. Incisions that had been recently made. Someone with serious medical training had operated on this animal, and recently, but the most shocking discovery came when he gently probed near the creature's abdomen. Something was there. Something that didn't belong. Matvey knew he was out of his depth. Despite his gentle touch with animals, these injuries required professional attention. There was only one person in the village he could trust with something this unusual. Olga Sergeyevna, the village veterinarian. Olga was 62, a widow like himself who had devoted her life to caring for animals after losing her husband to cancer 10 years earlier. She was known for her discretion and her willingness to help any creature in need, regardless of the circumstances. If anyone would understand and help, it would be her. The phone call was awkward. Matvey hadn't called anyone in months, and explaining the situation without sounding insane proved challenging. Olga Sergeyevna, this is Matvey Antonovich. I need your help. I have a wolf. A dead wolf? She asked, assuming he wanted help butchering game. No, a living one, injured. Someone hurt it badly, and I think someone operated on it. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. Matvey, are you feeling all right? Perhaps you should call Dr. Petrov. I'm not losing my mind, Olga, please. This animal needs help, and there's something very wrong about what's been done to it. I think it might be connected to those rumors we've been hearing. Those rumors. Everyone in the village had heard whispers about increased criminal activity in the region. Smugglers, they said, using the remote forests to move contraband, strange vehicles seen at night, unfamiliar faces in nearby towns, and animals found dead under suspicious circumstances. An hour later, Olga arrived with her medical bag and a skeptical expression that quickly changed to shock when she saw the wolf lying by Matvey's fireplace. The creature lifted its head as she entered, but showed no aggression, as if it understood she was there to help. Olga's examination of the wolf revealed the full extent of the horror that had been inflicted upon it. The surgical scars were just the beginning. Someone had implanted foreign objects inside the animal, objects that showed up clearly on her portable X-ray machine. "My God, Matvey," she whispered as the images appeared on the screen. "Someone has sewn packages inside this animal's body cavity. Look here, and here, these are clearly artificial objects wrapped in some kind of protective material." The wolf lay still during the examination, as if it understood that these humans were trying to help. Its remarkable calm in the presence of strangers reinforced Matvey's growing conviction that this was no ordinary wild animal. "This is what the smugglers have been doing?" Olga continued, her voice filled with disgust. "We've heard rumors, but I never imagined they're using animals as living cargo containers. The packages are surgically implanted, the animals are transported across borders, and then they're killed and cut open to retrieve the contraband," Matvey finished, the full horror of the situation becoming clear. "But this one escaped somehow," Olga said, gently stroking the wolf's fur. "Or was rescued. That's why they hung it. From the tree, they were torturing it, trying to get it to reveal where the packages were hidden, or maybe just making an example of it." As if responding to their conversation, the wolf made a soft sound. Not quite a whine, but something that seemed almost like an attempt at communication. Its golden eyes moved between the two humans with an intelligence that was both fascinating and unsettling. "What should we call you?" Matvey asked softly, settling down beside the animal. The wolf's ears perked up at his voice. "Buran," Olga suggested. "Like the winter storm. He's certainly been through one." The wolf's tail moved slightly at the sound of the name, the first sign of anything resembling contentment since Matvey had found him. From that moment on, he was Buran, and the unlikely trio was formed. That first night, as Olga prepared to leave, she made a disturbing observation. "Matvey, if this wolf was being used by smugglers, they're going to want it back. Those packages inside him represent a significant investment. We need to be very careful," but Buran had other plans. As the night deepened, the wolf became increasingly restless. He would walk to the door, look back at Matvey, and make soft sounds that seemed almost like requests. It was clear he wanted to go outside, but not for the usual reasons an animal might. "He's trying to tell us something," Matvey realized. "Look at how he keeps looking toward the forest. It's like he wants to show us something." Despite Olga's concerns about safety, curiosity won out. Bundled in heavy coats and armed with flashlights, the two humans followed the injured wolf into the dark forest. Buran moved slowly, but with clear purpose, leading them deeper into the wilderness than either had ventured in years. The abandoned shack stood hidden among thick pine trees, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Buran led them straight to it, then sat down in front of the door and looked back at his human companions expectantly. Inside, huddled in a corner under a pile of dirty blankets, they found Alexei. The boy was perhaps 16, thin to the point of emaciation, with dark hair and frightened eyes that seemed far too old for his face. When he saw the adults and the wolf, he scrambled backward until he hit the wall, terror written across his features. "Please don't hurt me," he whispered in Russian. "I don't know anything. I haven't told anyone." Olga was the first to move, her maternal instincts overriding her caution. She approached slowly, hands visible and empty, speaking in the gentle tone she used with frightened animals. "We're not here to hurt you, child. Are you hungry? When did you last eat?" The boy's story emerged slowly between bites of the food Olga had brought and sips of hot tea from Matvey's thermos. His name was Alexei Volkov, and until 3 weeks ago, he had lived with his father in a small cabin about 10 miles from where they sat. His father, Viktor Volkov, had been a skilled veterinarian who had worked in Moscow before retiring to the countryside. They had lived quietly, Viktor tending to the animals of local farmers and hunters. Then the men in expensive cars had arrived. They wanted Papa to help with their animals, Alexei said, his voice barely above a whisper. They offered a lot of money, but Papa said no when he saw what they wanted him to do. They were hurting the animals, putting things inside them. Papa called them monsters. The confrontation had been swift and brutal. When Viktor Volkov refused to participate in the smuggling operation, he had been eliminated as a threat. Alexei had only survived because he had been in the forest checking traps when the killers came to their cabin. "They killed Papa and burned our house," the boy continued, tears streaming down his face. "But Buran found me. He led me here, brought me food, kept me warm. He saved my life." As Alexei told his story, a stunning revelation emerged. Buran wasn't just any wolf. He had been Viktor Volkov's patient. The veterinarian had been captured by the smugglers and forced to operate on several animals before his death, but he had managed to sabotage at least one of the procedures. "Papa put something different in Buran," Alexei whispered, glancing at the wolf who lay peacefully beside Matvey. "Not drugs or money like the others. He put evidence, photographs, documents, recordings, everything he could gather about the smugglers before they killed him." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Buran wasn't just carrying contraband, he was carrying evidence that could expose an entire criminal network. Viktor Volkov, knowing he was likely to die, had turned one of their own transport animals into a living testimony against them. That's why they tortured him instead of just killing him, Olga realized. They know he's carrying something important, but they don't know what or where it's hidden. Matvey looked at Buran with new understanding. The wolf's unusual intelligence, his ability to lead them to Alexei, his almost human-like responses, it all made sense now. This animal had been trained by a skilled veterinarian who had recognized his exceptional nature and had entrusted him with a mission of justice. They're still looking for him, Alexei added fearfully. They know he escaped, and they won't stop until they find him. They can't afford to let that evidence reach the authorities. With this new information, everything changed. They were no longer just caring for an injured animal. They were protecting a key witness in a major criminal case. But they were also 3 vulnerable people and 1 wounded wolf against a ruthless organization with unlimited resources and no conscience. Matvey made the decision that would define the rest of their story. We're going to get that evidence to the right people, and we're going to make sure Viktor Volkov's sacrifice wasn't in vain. Over the next few days, a plan began to form. Olga used her connections in the veterinary community to quietly reach out to law enforcement contacts who could be trusted. Meanwhile, Matvey and Alexei worked to gather more information about the smuggling operation, using the boys' knowledge of the area and Buran's seemingly supernatural ability to navigate the forest. But the criminals were closing in. Strange vehicles had been spotted near the village, and several locals reported being questioned by men with Moscow accents who were looking for a large wolf and possibly a boy. The net was tightening around them. The breaking point came on their 4th night together. Buran, who had been growing stronger each day, suddenly became agitated. He paced the house, whining softly and looking toward the windows. His behavior was clearly a warning. Something was wrong. "They've found us," Alexei whispered, his face pale with terror. Outside, the sound of vehicle engines could be heard approaching through the forest. Multiple vehicles moving slowly and methodically, as if searching for something or someone. Matvey grabbed his father's old hunting rifle from above the fireplace, a weapon he hadn't touched in decades. Olga gathered her medical supplies, knowing they might need to run. Alexei huddled close to Buran, who stood protectively beside the boy despite his own injuries. The old teacher, who had once been afraid of his own shadow, was about to face the most dangerous men in Russia. But he was no longer alone. And he was no longer just fighting for himself. He had a family to protect now, an unlikely family of misfits and outcasts, brought together by tragedy and bound by loyalty. The real battle was about to begin. The sound of boots crunching through snow surrounded Matvey's house as at least 6 men took positions in the darkness. Through the frosted windows, flashlight beams cut through the night like searching fingers. The old man's heart pounded as he realized the full magnitude of what they were facing. These weren't just local thugs, but professional criminals with military-style equipment and tactics. "Matvey Antonovich," a voice called from outside, heavily accented with Moscow sophistication. "We know you have our property. Send out the wolf and the boy, and no one needs to be hurt." Inside the house, Alexei trembled against Buran's warm fur. The wolf remained alert but calm, as if he had been expecting this moment. Olga crouched near the window with her phone, desperately trying to get a signal to call for help, but the remoteness that had once been their protection now worked against them. "There is no boy here," Matvey called back, his voice steadier than he felt. "And the wolf is under my protection." Cold laughter drifted through the winter air. "Old man, you don't understand who you're dealing with. We represent interests that reach the highest levels of government. Your local police cannot help you, and your heroics will only get you killed." The voice belonged to Dmitry Kozlov, though Matvey didn't know his name. Kozlov was a cleaner for the Volkov syndicate. No relation to the dead veterinarian, just a cruel coincidence of names. He specialized in recovering lost assets and eliminating witnesses. In his 15-year career, he had never failed to complete an assignment. "You have 1 minute to comply," Kozlov continued. "After that, we come in, and we won't be gentle." Matvey knew they had no choice but to fight. The criminals wouldn't leave witnesses alive, regardless of what they promised. As the deadline approached, he made his final preparations, checking his father's old rifle and positioning himself where he could cover the front door and main window. "Whatever happens," he whispered to Olga and Alexei, "stay behind the furniture and keep low." Buran seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Despite his injuries, the wolf moved to a position near the door, his golden eyes fixed on the entrance with predatory intensity. The domesticated behavior he had shown over the past few days melted away, replaced by the raw instincts of an apex predator. The attack came with explosive violence. The front window shattered as armed men burst through multiple entry points simultaneously. Flashbang grenades filled the room with blinding light and deafening noise, designed to disorient and confuse their targets. But they hadn't counted on Buran. The wolf launched himself at the first man through the window with a fury that was both terrifying and magnificent. 150 pounds of muscle and fang collided with the intruder, sending his weapon flying as they crashed into the overturned furniture. The man's screams cut through the chaos as Buran's jaws found their mark. Matvey, his vision clearing from the flashbang, fired his rifle at the shapes moving through the smoke. The old hunting rifle boomed in the confined space, and one of the attackers went down. But there were too many of them, and they were too well trained. A hard blow to his head sent the old man sprawling, his rifle skittering across the floor. Strong hands grabbed Alexei, who fought desperately but was overpowered by men twice his size. Olga screamed as she was roughly hauled to her feet. "Enough!" Kozlov's voice cut through the melee. "Control that animal before I put it down." Two men with riot batons moved toward Buran, who stood over his fallen opponent, hackles raised and teeth bared. The wolf was bleeding from several new wounds, but his fighting spirit was unbroken. He positioned himself between the criminals and Alexei, making it clear he would die before letting them take the boy. "Magnificent creature," Kozlov said as he entered the house, stepping over the debris of the battle. He was a tall man with silver hair and cold blue eyes, dressed in an expensive coat that seemed out of place in the rural setting, but ultimately pointless. Dr. Volkov thought he was clever, hiding evidence inside his test subject, but we always recover our property. With the immediate threat neutralized, Kozlov's men secured the house. Matvey found himself zip-tied to a chair, his head throbbing from the blow he had received. Olga was similarly restrained, her face pale but determined. Alexei sat on the floor with his hands bound, Buran lying beside him, wounded but still protective. "Now then," Kozlov said, pulling up a chair to face his captives, "let's discuss the location of certain items that belong to my employer. The wolf is carrying evidence that could be inconvenient for our organization. We need it back." "I don't know what you're talking about," Matvey said, though the lie sounded hollow even to himself. Kozlov smiled without warmth. "Old man, we've been monitoring veterinary X-ray equipment purchases in this region. Dr. Volkov's daughter here has been very helpful in confirming what we suspected." Olga's eyes widened. Your equipment, your examination, your confirmation of surgical modifications. We have contacts everywhere, including the medical supply companies you use. Did you really think you could hide from us?" The revelation hit like a physical blow. Their attempt to help Buran had been tracked from the beginning. The criminals had simply been waiting for the right moment to strike. "The question now," Kozlov continued, "is whether we extract the evidence surgically, or whether we simply cut the animal open and sort through the mess afterward. The boy seems quite attached to the beast. Perhaps his cooperation will encourage a more humane approach." As Kozlov reached into his coat for what looked like surgical instruments, a new sound cut through the night, the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle. One of the men positioned outside cried out, and the others immediately went to high alert. "Report," Kozlov snapped into his radio. Static answered him. Another rifle shot, closer this time, and the lights went out as the power line to the house was severed. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting eerie shadows throughout the room. "Who else is out there?" Kozlov demanded, grabbing Alexei and pressing a knife to the boy's throat. I don't know, Matvey said honestly, but even as he spoke, hope began to flicker in his chest. There was only one person in the area with the marksmanship skills and knowledge of the forest to conduct this kind of precision attack. Ivan Petrov was 78 years old and had been living as a hermit in the deep forest for over a decade. A veteran of Afghanistan and Chechnya, he had retreated from civilization after losing his entire family in a car accident, not unlike Matvey's own tragedy. The two old men had occasionally encountered each other during hunting season, sharing silent nods of mutual understanding between fellow survivors of life's cruelties. Ivan had learned of the attack through the village communication network. Whispered conversations in the general store, worried phone calls between neighbors. When armed strangers started asking questions about wolves and boys, people talked. And when people talked, Ivan listened. The assault on Kozlov's team was methodical and devastating. Ivan had spent 40 years perfecting the art of asymmetric warfare, first in the army, and then as a hunter who could take down a charging bear with a single shot. 6 criminals with automatic weapons should have been more than a match for one old man with a bolt-action rifle. They weren't. One by one, Ivan eliminated the external security, using the darkness and his intimate knowledge of the terrain to remain invisible while striking with lethal precision. The men inside the house could hear their comrades falling, but couldn't locate their attacker. "This is impossible," one of Kozlov's remaining men whispered, his professional composure cracking. "It's like fighting a ghost." Kozlov's cold control finally shattered when a rifle bullet shattered the window next to his head, missing him by inches. "Burn it," he ordered. "Burn the whole place down. If we can't have the evidence, no one can." But as his man moved toward the gasoline canister, Buran made his move. The wolf had been conserving his strength, waiting for the moment when his enemies were distracted. With a surge of power that belied his injuries, he broke free from his restraints and launched himself at Kozlov. The crime boss had reflexes trained by years of violence, but nothing had prepared him for the fury of a wolf protecting his family. Kozlov's knife flashed, opening a gash along Buran's flank, but the wolf's momentum carried him forward, and they crashed to the floor in a tangle of fur, blood, and expensive clothing. The remaining criminals turned their weapons toward the struggling pair, but they couldn't get a clear shot without risking their leader. In that moment of confusion, Ivan struck again, this time from inside the house. The old soldier had infiltrated through the back door, while everyone's attention was focused on the front. His appearance seemed to materialize from the shadows. Themselves, rifle raised and ready. 2 quick shots, and the last of Kozlov's men fell. Kozlov managed to break free from Buran's attack, bleeding from multiple wounds, but still dangerous. He raised his pistol toward Alexei, desperation replacing his earlier cold calculation. "Stand down, old man, or the boy dies." But Ivan had fought. In wars where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. His rifle spoke once more, and Dmitry Kozlov crumpled to the floor. His threat ended forever. In the sudden silence that followed, the only sounds were the heavy breathing of the survivors and the distant wail of sirens. Help was finally coming. Buran limped over to Alexei, who threw his arms around the wolf's neck, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. Matvey struggled to his feet, looking at Ivan with profound gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply. Ivan nodded, once then melted back into the shadows as quietly as he had appeared. By the time the police arrived, there was no sign of the mysterious marksman who had saved them all. The official report would speak of criminals who had turned on each other in a dispute over territory. Sometimes the truth was less important than justice. The arrest of the surviving members of the smuggling ring sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld of northwestern Russia. When surgeons carefully removed the evidence packages from Buran's body, a delicate operation that Olga assisted, At the regional veterinary hospital, they found a treasure trove of information that Viktor Volkov had risked his life to preserve. Photographs documented the entire smuggling operation. Secret facilities where animals were surgically modified, shipping routes that crossed international borders, and most damaging of all, clear images of high-ranking officials who had been facilitating the operation. Audio recordings captured conversations between syndicate leaders discussing bribes, territorial agreements, and the elimination of witnesses. The evidence was so comprehensive and damaging that it triggered investigations in 4 countries. Within 6 months, over 30 arrests were made, including 2 members of parliament and a deputy minister who had been providing protection for the smuggling network in exchange for substantial payments. "Your father was a true hero," the lead investigator told Alexei during one of the debriefing sessions. "He knew he was going to die, but he made sure his death would mean something. This evidence will dismantle one of the largest animal smuggling networks in Eastern Europe." The village of Kirov, which had lived in fear of the mysterious criminals in their midst, experienced a remarkable transformation in the weeks following the raid. The story of the old teacher, the veterinarian, the orphaned boy, and the wolf who had taken down the Russian Mafia became legend. Matvey, who had lived in isolation for 5 years, suddenly found himself at the center of a community that wanted to celebrate him as a hero. The attention was uncomfortable at first. He had grown accustomed to solitude and grief, but slowly, as neighbors began visiting to hear the story firsthand, and as children from his former students' families came to meet the famous wolf, something began to heal inside the old man's heart. "You know," Olga said one afternoon as they watched Alexei playing in the snow with Buran, "I think this is what Katya would have wanted for you." Matvey nodded, understanding what she meant. His beloved wife had always believed that their greatest purpose in life was to care for those who needed protection. In saving Buran and Alexei, in standing up to forces of evil that seemed impossible to defeat, he had honored her memory in the most profound way possible. The local newspaper ran a series of articles about the case, carefully omitting details that might compromise the ongoing investigation, but celebrating the courage of ordinary citizens who had risked everything to do what was right. Pictures of Buran became iconic, the noble wolf with golden eyes who had carried evidence of justice in his wounded body. The question of what to do with Alexei was resolved in the most natural way possible. The boy had no surviving relatives, and the state orphanage system was overwhelmed and underfunded. When Matvey quietly applied to become his legal guardian, the approval came through with unprecedented speed, partly due to the boy's wishes and partly due to the media attention surrounding their story. Dedushka, Alexei had started calling him grandfather, and the word never failed to bring tears to Matvey's eyes. The small blue chair that had sat empty for 5 years was occupied once again, though now by a teenager rather than a small child. The house that had echoed with silence now rang with the sounds of life. Alexei's laughter, Buran's occasional howls, and conversations that stretched late into the evening. The boy proved to be remarkably resilient, despite the trauma he had endured. Perhaps it was his youth, or perhaps it was the stability and love he found in his new home. But within months of the attack, Alexei was thriving. He enrolled in the local school, where his story made him something of a celebrity among his classmates, though he remained humble about his experiences. More importantly, he showed a natural aptitude for working with animals, a gift he had likely inherited from his father. Under Olga's tutelage, he began learning the basics of veterinary care, and it became clear that he had found his calling. Viktor Volkov's legacy would live on through his son, though in ways the murdered veterinarian could never have imagined. "He has gentle hands," Olga observed, watching Alexei carefully bandage an injured rabbit that had been brought to their makeshift clinic. "And the animals trust him instinctively. It's a rare gift." The wolf's physical recovery was remarkable, but the emotional and psychological changes in Buran were even more extraordinary. As his strength returned, and the surgical scars healed, his true nature began to emerge more fully. This was no ordinary wild animal. Viktor Volkov had been training him for months before his death, recognizing the unusual intelligence and loyalty that set Buran apart from other wolves. The evidence packages had been removed, but Buran seemed to understand that his mission was complete. The constant alertness and wariness that had characterized his early days with Matvey gave way to a peaceful contentment. He became a beloved fixture in the village, known for his gentle interaction with children and his protective instincts toward anyone he perceived as vulnerable. Local wildlife experts were baffled by Buran's behavior. Wolves simply didn't integrate into human communities the way he had. They didn't seek out human companionship, didn't show affection towards strangers, and certainly didn't demonstrate the kind of problem-solving intelligence that Buran displayed daily. He's not fully wolf, Dr. Marina Volkova, a wildlife biologist from Moscow, concluded after examining Buran extensively. The genetic tests show wolf DNA, but there are anomalies that suggest either an unusual mutation or, well, it's impossible. But the markers almost suggest some kind of genetic enhancement. The implication was staggering. Had Viktor Volkov, in his final act of rebellion against the criminal syndicate, created something unprecedented? Had his modifications to Buran gone beyond simply hiding evidence, extending to actually enhancing the animal's natural abilities? The questions would never be fully answered. Viktor's research notes had been destroyed when the criminals burned his clinic. But the results spoke for themselves. Buran was a creature unlike any other, possessed of loyalty, intelligence, and emotional depth that transcended normal animal behavior. As autumn approached, their unusual household grew even more. Even the mysterious marksman who had saved them during the final battle began making occasional appearances. The old soldier's hermit existence had been shaken by his involvement in the rescue, and gradually he began to rejoin the world of human connection. 3 old men, a boy and a wolf, Olga said one evening, as they all sat around Matvey's dinner table. We must be the strangest family in Russia, but it was a family in every sense that mattered. They had found each other through tragedy and trauma, but they had chosen to stay together through love and loyalty. Each member brought something essential: Matvey's wisdom and compassion, Olga's practical skills and nurturing nature, Alexei's youth and hope for the future, Ivan's strength and protection, and Buran's unwavering devotion to them all. The house that had once been a monument to loss became a sanctuary of healing. Neighbors began stopping by regularly, knowing they would find warmth, good conversation, and perhaps a warm meal. Children from the village would come to play with Buran and listen to Alexei's stories about life in the forest. The impact of their story extended far beyond their small community. The case had exposed corruption at the highest levels of government, leading to reforms in wildlife protection laws and increased penalties for animal trafficking. Environmental groups across Europe used their story as a rallying cry for stronger enforcement of conservation laws. A documentary crew from Moscow arrived to film their story, though Matvey was reluctant to participate. It was Alexei who convinced him that sharing their experience could inspire others who had lost hope. People need to know that sometimes ordinary people can beat the monsters, the boy argued. Papa always said that silence in the face of evil is just another form of cooperation with it. The documentary, when it aired, became one of the most watched programs in Russian television history. Viewers were captivated not just by the dramatic rescue and the takedown of the criminal network, but by the deeper story of healing, family, and the power of compassion to transform lives. Letters poured in from across the country, from other survivors of tragedy who had found hope in their story, from children who had been inspired by Alexei's courage, from veterans like Ivan who had been living in isolation and were ready to reconnect with their communities. The government, eager to distance itself from the corruption scandal and associate with the heroes who had exposed it, bestowed numerous honors upon them. Matvey received the Order of Courage, Russia's highest civilian decoration for bravery. Olga was recognized by the Veterinary Association for her humanitarian service. Even Buran received official recognition as a hero animal of the Russian Federation, the first wolf ever to receive such an honor. But the recognition that meant the most came from an unexpected source. At a ceremony in Moscow, they were approached by an elderly woman who introduced herself as Dr. Elena Volkova, Victor's sister, whom they had never known existed. "My brother wrote to me about a special patient he was working with," she said, kneeling down to stroke Buran's fur. "He said he had found a wolf with the soul of a guardian angel. I thought he was being poetic, but I see now that he was being literal." She had brought with her Victor's personal journals, documents that had been stored in a safe deposit box and had escaped the destruction of his clinic. The journals revealed the full extent of Victor's work with Buran, documenting months of training and bonding that had created the unique relationship between man and wolf. "He knew they were going to kill him," Elena explained. "The last entry in his journal says, 'If something happens to me, Buran will carry the truth. He understands what's at stake better than any human I've ever known.'" As winter returned to Kirov, 1 year after Matvey had first found Buran hanging from that tree, the old teacher reflected on how completely his life had been transformed. The man who had believed his story was over, who had been ready to fade away into lonely obscurity, had instead become part of something magnificent and meaningful. Standing at his window, watching Alexei and Buran play in the snow while Olga tended to her latest patient and Ivan chopped wood for their fireplace, Matvey understood that this had been about much more than stopping criminals or saving a wolf. This had been about the fundamental truth that no one, no matter how old, how broken, or how forgotten, is beyond redemption. "Every ending is also a beginning," he whispered, remembering words his wife Katya used to say. She had been right, as she so often was. His story with her had ended, but his story as the grandfather of a remarkable boy, the friend of extraordinary people, and the companion of a legendary wolf was just beginning. The village children now called him Grandfather Matvey, and he had become the unofficial town storyteller, sharing tales of courage and kindness that would shape the next generation. But the greatest story, the one that would be told for decades to come, was the story of how love and loyalty could triumph over even the darkest forces. The evidence that Buran carried in his body had done more than expose criminal corruption. It had sparked a renewal of faith in the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. Wildlife protection funding increased dramatically across Eastern Europe. Veterinary schools began teaching courses on recognizing signs of animal trafficking. Most importantly, communities that had felt helpless against organized crime began to understand that silence was not safety. It was surrender. Viktor Volkov's sacrifice had not been in vain. His son lived on, carrying forward his father's love of animals and commitment to healing. The man who had murdered him was dead, and the network he had died to expose was destroyed. In a world that often seemed devoid of justice, their story proved that sometimes, against all odds, the good guys really do win. But perhaps the most profound legacy was the simplest one. A lonely old man had learned to love again. A traumatized boy had found a family. A wounded animal had discovered his purpose, and a community had rediscovered its courage. In the arithmetic of the heart, these transformations were worth more than all the criminal convictions and government reforms combined. Today, 3 years later, Matvey still wakes up every morning and makes coffee for more than one. The small blue chair is occupied by a young man who is now studying veterinary medicine in Moscow, but comes home every weekend to help with their growing animal rescue operation. Buran, now fully mature and magnificent in his prime, has become the father of several wolf dog puppies who seem to have inherited some of his remarkable intelligence and loyalty. The house rings with laughter and conversation, exactly as Katya had always dreamed it would. But now Matvey understands something he couldn't have grasped during his years of grief. The family we choose can be just as powerful and meaningful as the family we're born into. Their story reminds us that heroes aren't born from special powers or perfect circumstances. They emerge from ordinary people who decide that some things, love, justice, protection of the innocent, are worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. They're created when we choose compassion over indifference, courage over comfort, and hope over despair. In a world that can often feel dark and overwhelming, where corruption and cruelty seem to hold all the power, their story stands as proof that light still exists. Sometimes it comes in unexpected forms: an injured wolf, a lonely widower, a frightened boy, or a hermit who thought he was done with the world. But when that light shines, it has the power to expose every shadow and transform everything it touches. The story of Matvey, Alexei, Buran, and their extraordinary family teaches us that we're all capable of more than we know. Every day, we have opportunities to choose kindness over cruelty, courage over fear, and connection over isolation. The question is not whether we're strong enough or brave enough. It's whether we're willing to step forward when someone needs us, even if we're afraid, even if we feel inadequate, even if we think we have nothing left to give. That's what makes heroes. Not superpowers, but the simple decision to care about something beyond ourselves. Here at Wind Echo Untold, we believe in the power of these stories to inspire and transform. In the comments below, tell us about a time when you found courage you didn't know you had, or when someone showed you kindness that changed your life. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that hope still exists in this world. If stories like this one inspire you to believe in the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We're committed to bringing you the untold stories that matter, the ones that prove human decency and animal loyalty can triumph over even the darkest forces. Remember, somewhere out there, another unlikely hero is about to discover that their story is just beginning. It might even be you. Until next time, this has been Wind Echo Untold, reminding you that the best stories are the ones that are true, and the most powerful truths are the ones we almost never hear.